Close your eyes, dear listener. Let the noise of the day melt away. Allow each breath to slow, like a soft breeze drifting through ancient ruins. Tonight, we set sail to Secrets of Ancient Maps, the Cartographer's Curse.
The year was 1539, a time when the boundaries of the known world were shifting like sand under restless tides. Spain and Portugal carved oceans into empires. The Ottomans stretched their banners across 3 continents, and whispers of new lands came from the west with every returning ship. The age hungered for maps, charts, atlases, anything that might give certainty to a world suddenly wider than imagination itself. But certainty was a dangerous thing.
In the candlelit chambers of the University of Salamanca, a young scholar named Mateo de Alarcón bent over parchment yellowed by centuries. His fingers trembled as they traced the inked coastlines, sharper and darker than they had any right to be after so many years. The document had been hidden, bound between false covers of Aristotle's Meteorologica, passed hand to hand among those who trafficked in forbidden knowledge. Mateo should never have seen it. Yet here it was before him, a map that should not exist.
The parchment did not resemble the Ptolemaic grids he had memorized, nor the clean lines of the Portuguese navigators. This map was older, stranger. Its coastlines wavered between the familiar and the impossible. Iberia and Africa stood true enough, but beyond them stretched lands uncharted, coasts too precise to be inventions, yet belonging to no sailor's tale he had ever read.
There, in the far Atlantic, rose a vast island shaped like a broken crescent. Atlantis, whispered a voice in his mind. To the north, where ice and fog should reign, sprawled a continent the ancients had called Hyperborea. And strangest of all, etched along the edges of the map in Arabic script were warnings. He who charts what is hidden binds himself to its fate.
Mateo closed his eyes. The script was Andalusian, familiar to him from his childhood tutors. His family had once been conversos, Christians descended from Jews, forever under the Inquisition's suspicious eye. That legacy had made Mateo cautious, careful with what he read, what he said aloud. Yet this map, this was no idle curiosity. It was a temptation.
The bells of Salamanca tolled the hour of Compline, echoing through stone halls. Outside, students caroused in the streets, singing bawdy songs of sailors and saints. But Mateo remained hunched in silence, candlelight catching the sheen of sweat on his brow. The map pulsed beneath his gaze. He could not explain it any other way. Lines seemed to shimmer as though freshly inked. Shadows danced across the parchment where none should be. He swore that if he leaned close enough, he could hear a sound, faint, like waves striking distant shores.
Madness, he whispered to himself, forcing a laugh. 'Tis only old ink. Yet the words of his teacher, Fray Tomas, returned to him. Beware maps, Mateo. A map is not a mirror, but a spell. It tells men what is possible, and in believing it, they make it real. Mateo pressed trembling fingers to the parchment.
At once, a vision consumed him. He saw ships sailing into fog, their sails swollen with phantom winds. He saw Norsemen rowing west into seas no chronicle admitted, their prows carving toward unseen continents. He saw Arab dhows slipping across the Atlantic, guided by a green star no mariner's compass knew. And behind them all, always, was the same hand,
an unseen cartographer, sketching their paths before they ever sailed, commanding the world to take the shape of ink on paper.
When Matteo gasped and pulled back, the candle had burned low. His chest heaved as though he had run miles, his mouth dry with salt that should not have been there. The map lay before him, unchanged, but he understood now what the Arabic scrawl had meant. The map did not show the world. The map made the world. And whoever drew it had cursed every hand that dared hold the quill after.
The next morning, Matteo walked the cloisters with hollow eyes. The sun seemed too bright, the chatter of fellow scholars too shrill. He carried the false Aristotle beneath his arm, its weight dragging at him like a chain. He longed to show someone, to prove he was not mad. But who could he trust? The Inquisition's agents prowled everywhere, their ears sharp for the sound of heresy. A single careless word could see him branded a sorcerer, a Jew, a traitor to crown and church alike. And yet to keep this secret alone was to bear a burden too great for one's soul. That evening, he made his decision. He would take the book to Fray Tomas, the one man whose wisdom had never failed him. But as he crossed the courtyard, shadows lengthened unnaturally. The bells rang vespers, yet the air grew chill, as though midnight had already fallen. Matteo glanced down. His shadow no longer followed his steps. Instead, it crept toward the wall, reshaping itself into coastlines, rivers, mountains. A map. Matteo did not sleep that night. Instead, he pored once more over the parchment, trying to decipher its origin. The Arabic script named its creator as Al-Hassan ibn Yazid, a cartographer of Cordoba who had vanished in the year 976, the very year the great library of Al-Hakam II had burned. Rumors had long whispered that priceless manuscripts were spirited away before the flames consumed them. Had this map been among them? He recalled a half-remembered legend that Al-Hassan had claimed to find an even older chart, one traced not by human hand, but by divine or demonic force. Some said it came from Anaximander of Miletus, who first drew the world in lines. Others whispered of Egyptian priests, or Babylonian stargazers, or even the Watchers of Enoch's book. Whoever its origin, one truth remained. Every cartographer who touched it disappeared. And now Matteo had touched it too. As dawn broke, a storm gathered over Salamanca, fierce and sudden. Windows rattled in their frames. Students woke screaming that the Tormes River had risen overnight, flooding the banks though no rain had yet fallen. Matteo knew, with a certainty that chilled his bones, that it was his fault. For in the restless hours before sunrise, unable to resist, he had added a single line of ink to the parchment, a river in the far north, sketched almost idly. And now in Salamanca, a river swelled as though answering to his hand. The curse was real. Matteo de Alarcón was no longer a scholar. He was a cartographer of fate, bound to a map that could unmake the world. Salamanca awoke to chaos. The riverbanks, swollen beyond reason, overflowed into streets where scholars once strolled, quills tucked behind ears, debating Aristotle and Ptolemy. Horses neighed, terrified by unseen currents. The storm had not passed, it had only begun. Matteo de Alarcón clutched the forbidden map to his chest, moving like a shadow through the flooded courtyard. His pulse pounded in rhythm with the tolling bells. each clang echoing as if warning him of some unseen doom. The city seemed to have changed overnight. Mist curled around lampposts like fingers, and whispers drifted on the wind. Not human voices, but something older, more knowing. He remembered Fray Tomas's warning. A map is not a mirror, but a spell. Now Matteo understood. The world did not merely contain the map contained the world. And he had drawn on it.
By mid-morning, word had spread. Strange tides had claimed 3 small bridges. Farmers spoke of ghostly ships in the river, their sails glinting silver in the fog. Scholars whispered about curses, while priests muttered prayers for divine protection. Matteo tried to blend in with the crowds, but the city's energy seemed to recoil at him. He felt eyes upon his back, invisible yet heavy. He was not wrong. The Inquisition had already taken notice.
Father Ignacio Velasco, an inquisitor of grim reputation, had arrived from Toledo under orders from Cardinal Cisneros himself. His robes were black as midnight, and his eyes carried the weight of judgment and fire. Matteo had seen him once in a lecture hall, speaking of heresy and divine law. Even then, the young scholar had felt the man's gaze penetrate bone. Now, Ignacio was searching Salamanca like a predator scenting prey. Rumors of forbidden manuscripts, of strange celestial charts had reached his ears, and Matteo, the young scholar whose curiosity had always edged toward danger, would not escape scrutiny. Matteo ducked into the university's library, heart hammering. Shelves of leather-bound tomes loomed above him, labyrinthine and silent. Here, perhaps, he could hide. Perhaps. Yet the map, folded beneath his cloak, seemed alive. He could feel it pulling him, urging him towards something. A compass of destiny, perhaps, or a chain of misfortune.
Hours passed, and Matteo worked feverishly, comparing the forbidden map to known charts. The similarities were uncanny. The shapes of Africa, Iberia, even the outlines of India were almost exact. But the differences were terrifying. Islands appeared in the Atlantic that no sailor had ever recorded. Mountain ranges rose where plains should have stretched. Rivers flowed against gravity itself, as if reality had been rewritten on parchment. One particular feature drew him like a lodestone, a black spiral etched into the far north, labeled in tiny, elegant Arabic script, Meridian of the Lost. He had no idea what it meant, but when he traced it with a fingertip, a shiver ran through him, not cold, but a deeper, older sensation, as if the world itself had noticed his touch.
Night fell, and with it came silence, broken only by the river's unnatural roar. Matteo crept to his modest lodging, careful to avoid the city's main streets. But the shadows had grown restless. Shapes moved where none should be, as though the map had begun to project itself onto reality. At the corner of Calle de San Benito, he saw them for the first time. Figures in dark cloaks, not priests, not men, but something in between. Their eyes glimmered like ink in moonlight, and in their hands were compasses that spun without ceasing. "They are drawn to it," he whispered. He didn't know why he said the words aloud. Perhaps in speaking, he hoped to understand them. The figures vanished before he could get closer, leaving behind only the smell of salt and old paper. Matteo shivered. He had glimpsed a truth. The map was alive, and it attracted those who could sense its power. Inquisitors, scholars, and perhaps worse.
The following morning, Matteo received a letter slipped under his door by unknown hands. The handwriting was precise, the ink black as obsidian. Bring the map to the cathedral by nightfall. Fail, and your soul shall serve the map forever. No signature, no seal. Yet he understood perfectly. This was not a request. It was a summons from forces older than Spain, older than the Inquisition, older even than the map itself. Matteo packed the map carefully, slipping it into a satchel lined with waxed cloth. He left behind the modest comforts of his room, a quill, an unfinished treatise, and the illusion of safety. He had begun a journey he could not stop. By dusk, he reached the cathedral. Its spires rose like the fingers of a giant, clawing at the crimson sky. Candles flickered in the nave, casting shadows that danced across the stone like restless spirits. Matteo's footsteps echoed as he approached the altar. There, waiting in the gloom, was Father Ignacio. His black robes absorbed the candlelight, and his gaze pierced Matteo with the force of judgment. "You have touched what should not be touched," Ignacio said. "Do you know what this means?" Matteo nodded, unable to speak. The map throbbed against his chest as though acknowledging the Inquisitor's words. It is no mere parchment. It is a conduit, a chart not of geography, but of fate. Every hand that draws upon it alters the world itself. And now you have drawn. You have chosen. Matteo trembled. The air in the cathedral seemed to thicken, pressing down upon him like water in a deep ocean. He understood, at last, that history was no longer fixed. It could be bent, twisted, rewritten, by him, by the map, or by those who sought to control it. Ignacio stepped closer. "The Inquisition will not protect you. They will not destroy you. Only the map can decide. Only the map will judge." That night, Matteo fled. He stole into the catacombs beneath the cathedral, where tombs of bishops and knights lay undisturbed for centuries. There, he whispered a promise to the shadows. "I will not let the world be unmade." And so began his flight across Europe, a scholar hunted by men who feared knowledge, chased by a curse older than any kingdom, carrying a map that held not lands, but destinies. He would soon learn that every legend he had heard, of Norse explorers lost to the sea, of Arab sailors reaching shores unseen, or Greek philosophers dreaming of impossible continents, was part of a single pattern, a map that had existed long before him, shaping history from the shadows. And the deeper he traveled, the more he realized. The map's curse was not only upon him, it was upon the world. Matteo de Alarcon's flight from Salamanca carried himself through the rolling hills of Castile, then east into Aragon and Catalonia, and finally to the port of Valencia. The forbidden map lay folded carefully within his satchel, its edges curling like the wings of some dark creature, pulsing faintly against his chest. He had learned to read its subtle signals, coastlines that shimmered when danger approached, rivers that guided his steps, and islands that appeared in ink only when he thought of them. It was as if the map breathed with him, and yet not for him. Matteo realized that he was not its master. He was merely its courier, a single instrument in a design older than any kingdom. At the port,
The harbor was alive with sailors unloading cargo from the Mediterranean and beyond. Spices from Alexandria, silks from Damascus, and ivory from the African coasts jostled for space along the docks. Matteo's eyes scanned the ships hungrily. He needed passage east, toward lands whispered of in the Arabic script, Al-Jazira al-Khadra, the Green Island, a place said to hold knowledge older than the caliphates. He found a vessel, the Sultan's Wind, captained by a Greek named Nikandros, a man whose reputation for courage and superstition balanced in equal measure. Matteo approached under the guise of a scholar seeking travel, but he could not hide the tension in his movements. Nikandros, sensing the weight of hidden purpose, asked only one question. "Do you navigate by stars or by secrets?" Matteo hesitated. The truth that he navigated by a map older than history itself would have condemned him. Instead, he murmured, "By stars and some secrets." The captain nodded, a knowing glint in his eye, and welcomed him aboard.
The first nights at sea were uneventful, yet Matteo could not rest. He stayed awake on deck, tracing invisible lines over the horizon, listening to the waves. The map had begun to show new islands that did not appear in any maritime chart, some rising from the depths as if called into being. Matteo's mind reeled. Could ink summon land? Could a cartographer redraw the world? He recalled the legends Fray Tomas had whispered to him as a boy, of Norsemen lost beyond Greenland, of Arab dhows guided by green stars, of Ptolemaic explorers who sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules and never returned. Matteo now realized these were not mere stories. They were fragments of a single truth, a map older than civilization itself, shaping every voyage, every discovery. On the seventh night, the ship entered a region where the sea shimmered unnaturally. The compass spun in Matteo's hands, useless against currents unseen. Stars overhead rearranged themselves, forming constellations he had never learned, though they were strangely familiar. "By Zeus," whispered Nikandros, squinting toward the horizon, "the sea, it is alive." Matteo leaned over the rail and glimpsed something that made his heart seize. An island, shrouded in mist, yet glowing with a pale green light. Its beaches sparkled with sands that reflected not sunlight, but some internal luminescence. Trees rose tall and silver, their leaves like mirrors. In the distance, a pyramid of black stones seemed to pierce the clouds. He recognized it instantly from the map, Al-Jazira al-Khadra. As the ship drew closer, the water itself began to churn unnaturally. Shadows moved beneath the waves, shapes that hinted at ancient beasts. Matteo's hand pressed against the map, and the lines of ink throbbed violently. It was warning him, or perhaps summoning him.
The crew murmured prayers and muttered curses. Nikandros tried to steer clear, but the currents would not allow it. The ship was drawn inexorably toward the shore, guided not by wind or sail, but by the will of the map. Matteo felt a chill that penetrated bone. They were entering a place older than memory, a place untouched by man, and yet shaped by human hands centuries before. As the Sultan's Wind touched the shore, Matteo stepped onto the glowing sand. The map pulsed, hot against his chest. He had crossed the edge of history into myth. Every legend he had read, every tale of lost continents had converged here. And he was not alone. Figures emerged from the mist.
Not sailors, not scholars, but beings of a different age entirely. Tall, luminous, their eyes deep as starlit oceans. They spoke in a language Matteo did not recognize, yet somehow understood. "The map brought you," their voices intoned as one, echoing in his mind. "And now the world may yet be remade." Matteo fell to his knees, overwhelmed. He understood finally the full weight of what he carried. A cartographer's curse, older than kings, older than empires, a force that could bend the world to the ink of a single hand. And the beings before him were the guardians, or perhaps the judges, of what he had dared to touch. For days Matteo wandered the island under their watch. He saw temples built from stone that remembered the stars, rivers that flowed backward, and forests filled with creatures both wondrous and terrible. Every step seemed to echo with history. Greek explorers lost to the sea, Norse sailors swallowed by fog, Arab mariners guided by green stars. All had been drawn here, their stories inscribed in the very land. The beings spoke to him in visions rather than words. He saw maps drawn in fire across the sky, cities that rose and fell in a single heartbeat, empires written and erased by lines of ink. The curse was a chain, linking every cartographer across centuries, and Matteo was its latest link. He realized that the only way to survive, the only way to end the curse, was to understand it fully. He must travel farther, beyond Europe, beyond known seas, to lands recorded in myth and memory alike. He must seek the origins of the map itself, where the line between history and legend blurred completely. And so, with the island fading behind him as the ship turned eastward once more, Matteo knew that his journey had truly begun. He was no longer a scholar, no longer a simple man. He was a cartographer of fate, bound to a curse older than the world, and every step he took would echo across centuries.
Matteo de Alarcón sailed eastward, leaving the mystical island of Al-Jazira al-Khadra behind. The Sultan's wind carried him through waters that no map had ever recorded, guided only by the pulsing lines of the forbidden map. The stars overhead shifted in unfamiliar patterns, forming constellations that seemed to direct him, and sometimes warn him. Weeks passed, and Matteo reached the port of Ormuz, a city alive with traders from India, Persia, and distant Arabia. Here, whispers spoke of a library lost to time, the Library of Lost Empires, said to contain scrolls older than Babylon, manuscripts stolen or hidden when great civilizations fell, and knowledge that could bend reality. Matteo knew instinctively that the map's origin awaited there. Every pulse of ink, every phantom coastline had guided him toward this place. The map did not merely chart geography. It charted knowledge, power, and the fate of those who dared follow it. He journeyed inland through the deserts of Persia, accompanied by guides who spoke in riddles, their eyes betraying knowledge of secrets Matteo could barely grasp. They led him to a hidden valley where the library rested within a collapsed ziggurat, its walls etched with symbols older than writing itself. Inside, scrolls and tomes were stacked like waves, some radiating a faint green glow. Matteo could feel the weight of centuries pressing upon him. He unfolded the forbidden map again, and the lines of ink began to shift, pointing toward a central chamber. There, carved in black stone, was a massive circular chart, a map of the world, not in lands, but in time and memory. Stars, rivers, cities, and oceans flowed across it as if alive, merging history and myth. Matteo realized the terrible truth. The map was a copy, a fragment of this greater map. Every cartographer who touched it had become part of the world it depicted.
The guardians of the library, beings neither fully mortal nor divine, appeared. They spoke in voices like wind and stone. "You have traced the lines of history, young scholar. You have drawn where no hand should. The map judges you." Matteo bowed, trembling. "I did not seek power. I only wished to know the world." "Knowledge alone is not harmless," they intoned. "Every line alters reality. Every hand leaves a mark. You may end the curse, but only if you understand its true nature." The map before him began to shimmer, and Matteo stepped forward. He traced the coastlines, rivers, and mountains, but this time he did so not as a scholar, but as a witness. He understood. To break the curse, he must chart the world as it truly existed, not as ambition, greed, or legend demanded. Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless. With each careful line he drew, the map pulsed, slowly calming. Islands faded where they had never existed. Rivers flowed in harmony with gravity. Cities rose and fell in accordance with their history. Finally, Matteo completed the task. Exhausted, he laid down his quill. The guardians observed silently. "The curse ends with understanding. You have seen and you have respected what is. Now your place in the chain is released." The map's glow faded. Matteo felt the weight lift from his chest, a burden centuries old, vanishing in an instant. He realized that the curse had never been punishment, but a test, to ensure that the knowledge of the world was treated with reverence, not ambition.
Matteo returned to the coast, carrying no map save the one he had completed in the Library of Lost Empires. The seas were calm now, stars fixed in patterns he recognized. The winds carried no threat, only a gentle promise of passage home. He had one final task: to ensure that the knowledge of the forbidden map would never again tempt mortal ambition. With the Guardian's guidance, he sailed to a hidden island in the Indian Ocean, a place untouched by man, where the map could exist but not influence the world. There, Matteo buried the map deep within the earth, beneath stone and sand, leaving only a trace of its existence in memory, a lesson in humility for any who might seek it in the future. As he stood upon the shore, watching the sun rise over endless waves, Matteo reflected on his journey. He had traversed seas that no navigator had charted, encountered islands of myth, faced creatures and forces that blurred the line between legend and history. He had glimpsed empires rise and fall, and seen firsthand the terrible power of knowledge when wielded without wisdom. He smiled faintly. The world was safe again, for now, and he, Matteo de Alarcón, would return to Europe not as a mere scholar, but as a keeper of secrets, a guardian of history, and a witness to the thin line between myth and reality. Yet, in the quiet of dawn,
as the waves whispered against the shore, he felt a familiar pulse, not of curse, but of memory, reminding him that maps are never truly still. The world could always be redrawn, if only by the hands of those who dared understand it. Matteo breathed deeply. He would not draw again. The curse had ended, and with it his destiny as the last cartographer of the forbidden map. The sea stretched before him, infinite and timeless, carrying stories yet untold, waiting for those brave enough to trace their lines. And for the first time in years, Matteo felt peace.